And the headline for today is Future. Most of our partners are from civil society, from organized civil society organizations that defend people's rights. And for many of you, our partners, you have been part of this history of the last 30 years, or a part of it, and these last 30 years have been a time of hope and of despair, of joy and of sadness, and above all, of success and failure, of victory and defeat. Because if you embody the values of democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and of tolerance, then the 30 years have been a time of constant struggle. This office opened immediately after a year of open and terrible political violence in Turkey. And yet, as the first two heads of office, Fügen Uğur and also Ulrike Dufner, told us in the video you can see in the other saloon at the wall, they said that the first 20 years, more or less, they were in charge of, from 94 to Gezi in 2013, were marked by a sense of what we call in German Aufbruch. I looked in the dictionary, it said, as you can also translate it, the decampment, which I like. It's leaving the camp and setting off for new, greener, brighter shores. Of course, this Aufbruch was marked by the up and downs that are typical for sailing on troubled waters. But there was the hope that Turkey could join the EU as a member. There was the belief that the time of military coups would be over, that Turkey would follow the path of democracy, consolidate it, find a way to live with its past and its present, which among many other things means living with a fifth of its population who have a Kurdish identity and culture. When I arrived here a year and a half ago, the first thing I saw was an open, active, diverse civil society carrying out its projects. Of course, I also immediately learned about the difficulties. Repeated audits by the government with no announcement or just a day before, difficulties in receiving money, especially from international donors, harassments in the Kurdish regions, but not only there, constant arrests of people who stood up for their rights and stand up for their rights, elected representatives replaced by governors appointed by the central government. And I learned more. There are a number of laws that allow critical voices to be silenced at any time. There are still independent media, but they are few, and it's difficult to get through the front of controlled media, especially in television and newspapers. And so on and so on. You know that much better than me. So I could see and hear that those who are striving for democracy, the rule of law and tolerance, see themselves surrounded by walls. And these walls seem to be moving, coming closer and closer, blocking paths, shrinking spaces. The atmosphere is one of stagnation rather than progress, of pessimism rather than optimism, and above all, of stalemate. The excessive punishment of exposed political opponents is a signal to all those who think differently and eventually speak out about what can happen to them. Political injustice is being applied, but almost more importantly, the fact that these unfair laws can be applied at any time serves the purpose to paralyze people and their thinking. It is therefore not surprising that the political thinking of many people in Turkey is constantly focused on the authoritarian and repressive reality they are facing. When they think about the future, they think about threats, narrow spaces, darkness. It is the result of a systematic and deliberate politics of fear. I would call it like that, politics of fear. It is a form of violence that causes mental and emotional as well as physical damage. It is harmful both individually and collectively. This actually that for many people the future is blurred, is bleak, blank, and therefore rather non-existent. This is a worldwide phenomenon. even under non-authoritarian conditions. The liberal promise of progress and freedom through democracy seems empty and meaningless today to growing segments of the population. In Turkey, many people see this promise of progress and freedom through democracy. They see this promise as overtaken by history and even as an enemy of Turkishness and Turkey's destiny. Many others in this country, however, and probably for most of you, they still see this as a promise and as a prerequisite, actually, for a new, non-polarized and forward-looking relationship. The question is how to move towards this goal of a non-polarized and forward-looking relationship. How to move towards resonance, to put here a term that you're going to hear later several times. So I say, we as Heinrich Böll Foundation say, every future is unknown, but it is also shapeable, and in this sense open, full of possibilities. It is time, perhaps, to rediscover and strengthen this openness as an intellectual and political and emotional attitude. This is what we at the Heinrich Böll Foundation believe. Defeats also have positive potential, from the emotional to the epistemological. And Turkish civil society is still active. It is diverse. It has its own power. It has a history of struggle, resistance, and considerable progress to draw on as an emotional reservoir. It has learned, it is experienced. It can still do much of what it sets out to do. And it knows that it can count on international solidarity. New generations are coming up that may be tired of this violent, polarizing form of politics. Also because actually it harms everyone. So this civil society has the potential and the practice of being a politically active public sphere, which, according to our keynote speaker and special guest Hartmut Rosa, is the precondition for realizing resonance. Resonance means getting in touch with the world, building a relationship that can transform myself and the world. Resonance is what we need to counter or mitigate the effects of alienation. Now, if this is as clear as mud to you, wait a few minutes. Professor Rosa is going to explain it to you. Professor Rosa has developed a sociological theory to understand today's world and make a proposal to try to improve the situation, including this one, the loss of positive future prospects. To be clear from the start, Professor Rosa is not an expert on Turkey, and he does not claim to be so. He explicitly told me, I am not coming to tell the Turkish people what to do. But his theory has the great advantage of combining structural, analytical elements with people's everyday lives, abstract categories like alienation with the feelings and emotions of individuals, of us. So what will happen now is that Professor Rosa will explain to us the basic lines of his theoretical thinking and perhaps link it to some aspects of the reality you face here in Turkey. We will then go more into detail with the help of political philosopher Professor Zeynep Savaşçın from Galatasaray University, who is familiar with Professor Rosa's writings and has published on him in Turkish. After a short coffee break, we're going to have a second panel. We will have 3 representatives of the future generation, those who will be shaping the society in a few years' time, or who have already started to do so. They are between the ages of 21 and 26. 2 of them are alumni of our fellowship program, our scholarship programs, and I'm very happy to see that many of our scholars and alumni are joining us this afternoon. Welcome to all of you. Okay, our 3 young panelists have been reading up on Professor Rosa's theory, and they will now listen and follow the discussion, the first panel, and then join Yonca Verdiolo in discussing possible perspectives for creating a new future for Turkey. And in both sessions, you, the audience, you will have the opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the debate. So thank you for joining us today. And now let's get started. Professor Hartmut Rosa is a professor of sociology and social theory at the Friedrich Schiller University in Jena, and also director of the Max Weber Kolleg at the University of Erfurt. Jena and Erfurt, for those who are familiar with Germany, you know that, are two cities in the state of Thuringia in the east of Germany. And he is also an affiliated professor at the Department of Sociology, New School for Social Research in New York. He received his PhD in political science from Humboldt University in Berlin, and after that he held teaching positions at the University of Mannheim, Jena, Augsburg, and Essen, and served as vice president and general secretary for Research Committee 35 of ISA, and is one of the directors of the annual International Conference on Philosophy and the Social Science in Prague. Actually, there's a lot more to say. I will cut that now to mention that two of his books were translated into Turkish. The one is Acceleration and Alienation. In Turkish is something like Yabancılaşma ve Hızlanma. And the other one is, actually, it was written originally in English, I think, the uncontrollability of the world, Dünyanın kontrol edilmezliği. That is the other book. These books are available here in Turkey. And now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dawid Bartelt, for this kind and insightful introduction, and to you and the Heinrich Böll Stiftung for inviting me here. It's very exciting for me. I've not been to Istanbul or Turkey before, so I'm really coming here actually to learn and to engage in dialogue with you. And as you said, I don't want to of course, I don't want to tell the people in Istanbul or Turkey what to do, but I want to contemplate with you together how we could construct, how could we think of a future we want to embrace and we want to go to. I mean, for me, I was really happy to see that unlocking the future is the topic of today's event. Because as you just said, I think we have the same problem all over the world. I would really say we have lost the future, and I learned from Dawid Bartelt, but also, of course also what I read about Turkey, that this is a problem here too. I think, you know, when I say we have lost the future, I think we don't really have any conception of a society we want to move towards. Right? When you look at, for example, at the political discussion, even in Germany, right? We do have a diverse group of parties, of course, but I think they are all struggling against something which they think is awful, right? So, for example, the Greens, which are close to the Böll Stiftung, of course, they envision, I would almost say, climate disaster, environmental destruction. So they are struggling against it, and I think that's very important and very good, right? If you move to the right in Germany, they are fighting immigration. They think the immigrants will all take over, but it's not a conception of the future we want to go to. It's a conception of something they don't want to have, right? And then the middle parties are fighting the Russians and the Chinese. They are all kind of coming at us, right? That's not a view where we want to go to. It's something they are struggling against. And we have the Liberal Party. They are fighting the economic downfall. German the gross domestic product is going down, right? So again, we don't have a future we want to go to. We want to strive towards, we dream of. I really think this is very important, and this might be a problem for Turkey too. You talked about a stalemate, right, which you have in Turkey right now. If you want to know what's the state, what's the mood in Turkey or in Germany or in any society, I think we should not so much ask. It's very interesting, I would say, I can show by empirical research. People feel happy not just when they got a lot, when they have big houses and great cars. The most important thing is not what do you have. The important thing is where do you go, right? If people have the sense, you know, I mean, for a long time, and you could see this all over the world, and you were talking about Turkish history, you had important phases like this, where people did not have a lot, right? Where parents said, we are really working hard, right? Sometimes we don't have enough food or heating or so, but we are convinced we are building something for the future generations, for our children, right? I think this was an essential part of modernity's promise, right? Building a better world for future generations. And this better world was clearly had some material aspects, right? And coming out of scarcity and poverty and ignorance. So building a better world meant also building some form of welfare state, maybe educational policies, health systems, and some economic resources, but of course also human rights and a democratic world where people want to live in. And somehow we have lost this vision. You can really see this on a worldwide scale. It's certainly not just the problem of Turkey. There's new empirical data which says 70% of people, right, particularly in so-called developed societies, now think that their children will have a life worse than themselves, right? So that's the abyss, right? The downfalls where we are moving to. So the question is, for Turkey as for the rest of the world, right? How can we get back to how can we regain the future as a world we want to live at and to live in? And I think, I come from Germany, so-called Middle European perspective, and my view is we do not just lose the future, or we have lost the future. We now also lose the past in a certain sense, because we thought for a long time, the past, that's enlightenment, right? That's democracy, liberalism, human rights, that's the values we stand for, it's freedom, it's this progress story. But now there's a kind of reinterpretation of this process going on where Europeans discover, our past was not just enlightenment and human rights and so on. It also was colonialism, it was imperialism, it was repression, oppression, sexism, and so on. So I think, the future is always also connected to the past. I will introduce the resonance concept in a minute, right? And I think resonance clearly has a kind of historical connection, having a sense of where you come from, listening to your history, right? And out of this sense, it doesn't mean affirming what you had in the past, because when you're German, you don't want to affirm everything we had in the past, right? So listening to the past and answering it might sometimes be a no, right? We had at least 12 years of German history, actually more of this, where we clearly want to, when we listen and answer, we would say never again, let's go elsewhere. But nevertheless, I think what a country, what a civil society, a civilization needs is a sense of where do we come from and where do we go towards. And I think Turkey is, from my poor understanding, you are the experts on your country, not me, right? But I find particularly this area here absolutely fascinating because you have so many pasts, right? So when the question is, what is the past? You really see many, many different forms of past, different narrations, different histories, I would say, right? So resonance is engaging in the democratic resonance in a dialogue about possible pasts, where we come from, what we could learn from it, what it tells. And as many pasts as you have, as many futures there might be. I mean, in my understanding, Turkey is situated between east and west and north and south, right? And many different traditions. So maybe this is maybe in a certain sense that's the center of the world, right? Where do we want to go? Yeah, I mean, this is a privileged place to think about this. What are the possible perspectives? What are possible futures and possible pasts? And how do we get there? I mean, for this we need, as you already said, and I think this is important for Heinrich Böll Stiftung and for all of us, the promise of modernity is to do it in a political and in a democratic way. And therefore I want to talk in the rest of the time about what is politics and what is democracy and how it should be, right? So I will at first give you a short interpretation of my conception of a modern society, of capitalism, right? Because also Turkish society, whether it's semi-authoritarian, fully authoritarian, democratic, whatever, right? It's also capitalist, right? The economic laws of capitalism are very important here as elsewhere. And then I want to give you my conception of what politics is and also warn against some misconception, I think. And then give a kind of outline of a future I would like to go towards, right? And I think for me, that's the real promise of modernity. I call it the listening society here, right? But my insight starts with, Dawid Bartelt has mentioned it, with the acceleration book, right? At first, I realized that modernization, you can see in Istanbul and in other parts of Turkey, of course, has something to do with dynamization, setting the world literally in motion, speeding it up. We speed it up technologically, but we also speed up social change and our individual lives. The middle classes at least, but actually also the working classes and even the elites in Turkey as in elsewhere, I'm pretty sure, right? Get this feeling that time is a scarce commodity. We are always pressed for time, right? And there's always a sense of speeding up. And by the way, the question of what is modernity, I'm sure it's debated here too, right? Because what belongs to modernity and what is particularly just ethnocentric, for example, is hotly debated in the social sciences. But this is a structural definition which I believe is kind of value neutral. It doesn't say that Europe is good. It doesn't say that's good. Actually, I think that's part of the problem. But I define modernity and a modern society in this way. Society can be called modern when its mode of stabilization is dynamic, and that means it's not just dynamic, but it's increasingly dynamic. There's an escalatory logic, which means it systematically requires material growth, technological acceleration, and cultural innovation just to stay in the form it is. Right? You most clearly see this in the logic of the gross domestic product. Right? You need economic growth not to go somewhere, but to maintain what you have. I mean, that's of course the same in all over the world, in the United States, in the EU, outside the EU, in China or elsewhere. It comes from the Marxian logic of money, commodity, money, prime. This means money, commodity, money, prime is the Marxist formula for the economic motor. It means there's only investment of any sort if there is a promise of making more money out of it, getting more money out of it than what you invest, right? A company only invests into a factory or a shop or a restaurant, whatever it is, when there's the hope of some profit or rent, something more needs to be created. And this creates this dynamism. You have to grow. Max Weber says, as an enterprise, you either go up or you go down. You can never say, that's enough. Let's stay in this state. And that's true for individuals too, right? All of you, I assume, most of you, all of you, have the feeling you need to run faster and faster every year just to stay where you are, right? So there are two images which are very strong on this. One is the hamster in the wheel, right? Or the treadmill, right? The hamster has to run faster and faster without going anywhere, right? That's the logic a lot of people feel we are stuck in. But my favorite image is the downward escalator, right? The escalator which goes down. So as soon as you stand still, you're sliding backward. And that's true for the state, like the Turkish economy. It's true for the individual enterprise, even for the Heinrich Böll Stiftung, right? They have to come up with new programs, with new hardware, with new software, with new initiatives, with new people. Because if they say now it's enough, they're kind of losing ground, relatively speaking, to the others. And it's true for the individuals, right? You permanently have to run to stay where you are. And so acceleration, or this logic of dynamic stabilization, leads to social reality, which is kind of characterized by permanent technological acceleration, by the acceleration of social change, and by the acceleration of the pace of life. It means no matter how fast your life is this year, next year you have to run faster just to maintain what you have. And I'm always a bit cautious to say it's not just capitalism, right? You see here this formula, knowledge, research, more knowledge. And what I mean with this is that the modern logic of science follows the same logic, right? It's not preserving knowledge from the ancient scriptures or the ancestors or so. It's about increasing knowledge, right? We always have to promise right applications, which mean I know a lot, I will do research, and then we will know even more, right? It's always this logic of going beyond in the arts, in the sciences, in culture, in fashion, and in the economy. Okay, but I wanted to talk about democracy, right? But before I get there, let me make this one more point. And I think the political problem you were describing, right, is connected to this, that this logic of dynamic stabilization leads to a mode of aggression. What I do as a sociologist is analyze the way we live, you could say, right? The way we lead our lives. But I draw on the tradition of phenomenology here. And this is about the forms and the modes of being in the world and being to the world. How do we relate to the world around us? And my argument is that in a society which can only stabilize itself dynamically, the dominant mode of being in the world and to the world is a mode of aggression. Right? We live this life in aggression towards nature. We destroy the environment. It's really true. Instead of just controlling it, we destroy it by the extractive industries, but also by pollution. We live even in a mode of aggression towards ourselves. That's very interesting. That's what social research shows all over the world. I think I have not explicitly seen data from Turkey, would be very interesting, but from all over the world you get the same data right now that the young people, students, high school students or university students have an extremely high level of burnout, right, and stress and anxieties, right, and depression. 40% of German students, a new research has just found out, 40%, that's almost half of them, right, display severe symptoms of depression already. That's completely new with young people. We never had that before. And you have the same, you get the same data from Korea, from Japan, from China, very strongly, from Latin America, I was just in Portugal, it's the same there. And even in Denmark, the Danish are the happiest people of the world, they say, right? But depression, burnout, and this kind of stuff is increasing. And I think it's a form of autoaggression. There's very interesting data. You know, I like this, I have to tell this story. I should not stand here, I know. But there was in Germany at the time of reunification, there was a very interesting study between East and West Germans, right? So right around the time of reunification. So in 1990, I think the data is from. So people in East Germany and West Germany were asked, how do you feel about yourselves? Right? Are you content with yourself? Do you feel okay in your skin? Right? Fühlen Sie sich wohl in Ihrer Haut, is the German saying. Right? Do you feel okay with yourselves? And East Germans, to a significant degree, felt much better about themselves than West Germans. Right? East Germans said, yeah, I'm happy with myself. Right? I'm okay in the way I look and in the way I am. West Germans said, oh no, I'm too thick, right, and I'm too bald, and I'm too gray, and I have too many wrinkles, and I'm not fit enough, and so on. So West Germans were kind of not okay with themselves, East Germans were okay with themselves. Now reunification was successful in that regard. Now East Germans are totally dissatisfied with themselves also, right? But what you see from this is we become points of aggression for ourselves, right? We permanently feel, oh, I should do more for my blood pressure, I should do more for the number of steps I take, I should do more for the quality of sleep, I should do more for whatever it is, right? And also for our psyche. And even autoimmune deficiencies, these diseases is increasing, right? So my claim is we live in aggression towards nature, in aggression towards ourselves, and in aggression on a political level, right? So what you described from Turkey, that it's a kind of, it feels like a repressive, almost hostile environment, right? But this is a kind of reality we now face in Germany too. For the first time in German election campaigns, people were physically attacked in the streets. Right? For example, I would say now the antagonism seems to be mainly between Green politicians and AfD, right-wing politicians, and they are ready to attack each other even physically. And you saw it in the United States, where people shot at Trump twice. Democrats hate Trump people, right? Trump supporters, and the other way around, of course, right? Or in England with Brexit and Remainers. And so maybe if you have if you have a history or a certain aggressive mood in Turkey, I think it's just maybe a bit worse than elsewhere, but you see the same direction. There is empirical research on that too by Michael Bruter from the London School of Economics, and he found that in 32 of democracies, the political culture is changing towards aggression. People start no longer to think of each other as political opponents, but as enemies of mankind, right? I mean, that's a huge difference. I just told Dawid Bartelt, you could see this in Germany, in my university campus. I found it shocking, but also telling. We have to think about how did we get there, right? So in Germany, in Jena, every day at 2, there are 2 student protesters, two groups, right? On the one side of our square, there are people supporting the Palestinians, right? They are waving Palestinian flags, right? On the other side of the square, there's almost equal number of students waving Israeli flags, right? And now I would really say, as best as I can tell you, on both sides they are students of mine, and I think both of them are clever, they are intellectuals, and they are morally motivated. They really want to get something good, they want to defend human rights. But the problem is, on the other side of the square, they see enemies of mankind, genocidal murderers, right? I mean, those waving flags for Palestine think, oh, those on the other side waving Israeli flags, they want to do a genocide on Palestinians. They are genocidal murderers. And on the other side, those waving Israeli flags thought those are anti-Semitic Nazis, right? So my question is, how could it come to this point where students motivated, morally being intelligent, think of the other as an enemy of mankind? I mean, that's so sad and so stupid, but it's the reality we live in, right? And so I don't want to talk about this for a long time. I just want to say that this program, the program which is connected to modernity and to dynamic stabilization, is the promise of making the world controllable, right? Expanding the horizon of what we can make visible, of what we have access to, of what we can put to use and bring under our control. And this program of modernity somehow has failed. It really has created, I say, monsters of uncontrollability. We cannot control nature. We have created natural disasters with heat waves and so on, right? We cannot put to control the political world. And now we have come to the point where we are ready to kill each other, and what I said with the Trump supporters and the opponents, but also going back to war now, right? I think that's, of course, part of the Turkish reality. But there might be, I'm really looking forward to discuss that with you. I mean, in the German discourse, there has been a very significant slip now. You know, when Russia invaded the Ukraine, the German politicians, our coalition, but in particular our Chancellor Scholz said it's a turning of the tides, right? A kind of significant shift. And I thought that's hypocritical, because there was war all the time, right? I mean, there was war in Afghanistan and in Libya and even in Yugoslavia, and you in Turkey had a lot of wars going on, right? Civil war and other wars. So it's kind of hypocritical all of a sudden to say, oh, now war has come back. But now I think that was not the problem. The problem lies elsewhere. The problem is that before we thought, even with the Yugoslav war, the Afghan war, the Iraq war, there was hope. We thought, unfortunately, there is still war, but we need to work towards a world which will overcome war with the help of the United Nations organization, for example. With humanitarian and civil society movements, we will be able finally to create a peaceful world. So when Scholz says it's the turning of the tides, he meant that was an illusion. Now we have to face war and go for war, right? And I think, this is kind of what I said, losing the future. I mean, our Pistorius, our Secretary of Defense, told our young generations, you have to become prepared, ready for war, kriegstüchtig. That's not a future you would want to go to, right? So something has changed. So that's what I mean. We have created monsters of uncontrollability, because war is a monster of uncontrollability, as is the ecological disaster. And we have kind of created monsters of uncontrollability in the form of depression and burnout on the inside, right? So that's not where we want to go to. So how could it be different? I promised I will come up with a solution, right? But first, I have to say, well, what is politics? I want to make it very short, right? I will give you the slide, but I will speak freely, right? I think there is a problem in our definition of politics, and that's a problem of political theory. And maybe I don't know what you think about it from your reality, right? But on the political right, you very often have conceptions of politics. Carl Schmitt, for example, says politics is about the distinction between friend and foe. Well, I think that's the problem, right? Think of the campus in Germany, right? The foe was the students on the other side of the campus, right? You have to struggle against them, build coalitions, hegemonies, if you so like, right? And of course, there's Darwinian conceptions of politics, where politics in the end is about the struggle. It's about struggle, it's war with other means, so to speak, winning against the others. But on the political left, we had a kind of similar conditions. It comes in part from a Marxist tradition, which thinks it's about class struggle. The enemy is the capitalists, right? We have to fight them, right? And even people like Badiou or Rancière, French thinkers, post-structuralists, they say politics is about irreconcilable conflict. So they would say the heart of politics is conflict and struggle, at least a conflict of interests, and we somehow have to form coalitions, hegemonies, and or form compromises. And my claim is that this is already a wrong starting point. I want to go. I will move to the next point already. I claim, or maybe I need it. No. No, I said that, right? So from my point of view, that's already wrong, right? Because I would say it's wrong to think of people as kind of being naturally antagonistic. I think the way we relate to each other, the way we perceive of each other, right, is not defined by human nature, right? It's a kind of, it's itself a result of social interaction. So whether the others are your enemies, right, or your partners, some people you encounter, right? So what we do with difference is not in human nature or in social nature. It depends on the political and social process itself. And my main argument really is that politics is not in the first place about struggle. Politics is in the first place about shaping the society we live in. Because, I mean, there you could almost go anthropological, right? I mean, human beings are beings for whom the form of life is not defined by nature, right? We live in collective structures, political, legal, educational, economic, of course, right? And these structures are kind of historically and culturally variable. They can be different. But you cannot produce them on your own. They are not individual, they are collective. So politics is about the shaping of the collective structures we live in, right? I really think we should define politics in this sense. So you see here there are two claims. Number one is whether we encounter each other as enemies of mankind, right, or as hostile people with irreconcilable conflict, or as others whom we have to engage with, whom we interact with, right? Those, I mean, the view I want to defend is a Republican conception of democracy, which means, yes, there are people who have different opinions, different beliefs, different languages, different convictions. So how do I encounter them? And I think the problem is if I think those with different beliefs, convictions are my enemies, I have to fight them, either politically or militarily, right? And I think that's wrong. That's not necessarily true, right? The Republican conception of democracy says we can encounter each other as those who clearly have different interests, different beliefs, different opinions. So struggle or conflict is kind of natural to a certain sense. But republicanism means I want to hear your different belief, your different view, your different conception, and you want to hear mine, and then we engage in a kind of encounter which includes dialogue, but it's not just about arguments. It's really, I think politics is not about arguments as Habermas thought. I like Habermas a lot, right? But he thought it's all about finding the best argument. But I think it's about encounter, right? I hear a voice which is different, right? I see a body which is different, right? And a language which I might not understand, and it's kind of mutual engagement, talking to each other, forming each other, and then shaping the world we want to live in. So for me, politics, democracy does not start with something we already share. It's the idea of a collective project, right? Let's shape our future world. And the future world, I have a different conception from you and from others. So let's get together. So democracy, right? That's the next claim. The next claim says that democracy the politics is the shaping of the collective structures we live in. But I think it's very important to not start with rights. I mean, rights are important, but I think they are second step. look, it's a bit, I'm really convinced about this. Hopefully I can convince you too, right? Let's say we have a meeting or a conference like we have today, right? So we could actually sit together and say, what do we want to do in this conference, right? Then someone could say, I think we should have, I don't know, equal rights and a clear order of speaking or so. I think we would not get very far with this, right? What we need is a conception of where do we want to go to? What should be the goal of the conference, right? What do we want to achieve? And then, in order to achieve it, to reach a good goal, we need to define rights and things. But again, politics is about the shaping of the future, and democracy is the claim that everyone should have a voice in this process, right? It shouldn't be a president or a king or a church or I don't know what other religious organization who tells us how to live. Democracy is the promise that we all are involved in this shaping of the future. We all should have a voice, or everyone who is here, everyone who is part of the project has a voice in shaping this future. But I think part of the problem is, in Germany as in the United States and probably in Turkey, right? It's not just about having a voice. The voice only makes sense if you also have ears, right? So it means not everyone has a voice, everyone has ears. And the ears, or you could call it the listening heart, right? Means I want to hear you. Right? I mean, people in the US, let's take the US, right? They don't want to hear Trump, or if they are on the right, they don't want to hear Harris. They literally always chant and demonstrate, shut up, go away, lock her up, right? Or even kill her. It's the same in Germany, right? On the one hand, on the left, they protest Nazis raus, right? It means send the fascists off, which might not be the worst idea, but nevertheless, it means I don't want to hear you. And those on the right, they want to hang the Greens, right? They don't want to hear them. So I think democracy is not just about having a voice, it's also about having ears, right? It's this process. Everyone should have a voice and everyone should have ears. And then what kicks in is the Republican conception. It means in this process, we are transformed. Both sides or all sides do not stay the same. But it really means giving up the idea that I am right and the others are wrong, and the only political question is how do I get the right way, right? If you start with this, it won't work. I have to shut up 10 minutes, so that's easy. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I already said this, right? This creates, and it's really about shaping the future. And this sense, I think it creates a sense of solidarity. I find this really important. You know, people sometimes ask me, I was in Chile, and they said, oh, forget about this dialogue thing, and so on, right? There is no solidarity between people. But I think you don't see a social bond, a kind of common, something that connects you if you think of the other simply as enemies, and if you think of politics as simply struggle or conflict. If you think of politics as about shaping the world we collectively live in, that already creates a certain form of social connection. Yes, let's shape this world. Let's do it together, right? And then, of course, it doesn't mean that there will not be conflicts of interests or of values. But it's like in a conference. If everyone has exactly the same opinion, it's totally boring, right? So I might say, I will say in a minute, because I have 9 more minutes left, right, that we need a sense of the common good. And some of you might say, no, the common good is always an illusion. And then we really fight, but we still feel we're part of the same project, right? We are part of this conference and we want to go somewhere towards a better world. So this is what I just said, right? I really think it's very, very important that we go back to a sense of the common good. Politics should not be simply about my rights, right? Let's say I'm a part of any minority and I struggle for my rights or of a majority. I think we should get rid of the immigrants or whatever it is in Germany, right? Or I'm fighting for the environmental. All of this is important, but the argument should always be about the common good, about the common project, about the world we want to shape collectively. And now the problem with the common good, I could really imagine in Turkey, right, for example, is very difficult because some might say it should be a secular society. Some maybe would say, no, it's an Islamic republic or so. And then you could say, so what's the common good then, right? They have very different conceptions of this common good. I completely understand. Or the Kurdish people have a different conception of the common good. And this is why I say, and this will be my last point, or I have not yet. My last point, it should not be about a substantial definition of the common good, like, right, it should be Islamic or Christian or European or Asian or whatever, right? But it's a relational concept of the common good. As I said in the beginning, the relationships citizens have towards each other, right? They are not defined by nature. They are themselves the result of political process, right? So the question is, what should the relationships be? And building the right form of relationship is the common good. And there are 4 dimensions of the, now I really have to hurry up. So my claim is the relationships we need are relationships of resonance. That's what I claim. So what's resonance? I said the problem is that we live in a mode of aggression towards each other, right? And what's the alternative to this mode? You know it and I know it, we all know it, right? Sometimes, even if you go to a conference, you might be in a mode of aggression. I will tell this stupid German or whatever, or my enemies, right? What is true, that sometimes we are. But most of the time we want to listen and respond and enter into a kind of dialogue, right? If you go to a museum or to the opera or wherever you go, right, of this kind, you're not in a mode of aggression. You want to wait something that touches you, something that speaks to you. That's resonance. Resonance for me is the alternative mode of being in the world. And I claim it's the primary mode. All human beings know it because as babies, right, we are really geared towards resonance. We need it. Discovering there are eyes of the mother or the voice, right? Most of the time it's the mother, not necessarily. There's something addressing me, something kind of calling me, touching me, reacting to me. This is how we develop a sense of being a subject. So resonance is a mode of relationship which has 4 elements. Number 1, something touches me, something speaks to me. Number 2, I'm capable of answering, of reaching out and connecting. And this is the moment where you feel alive. That's the moment where you're not in burnout, right? When you feel, for example, if in a conference like this, someone, it doesn't have to be the speaker, it might be your neighbor, it might be a small gesture, it might be something or something on the screen, right, that touches you. And then I can really see your eyes change, right? They beam up. Oh yes, something is happening. Resonance is a process. It's dynamic between you and the world. Something touches you and you start to answer, right? You start to answer with your eyes, but with your whole body. And then you start thinking. And the answer is not necessarily, I totally agree. If you totally agree, if it is what you always thought, that's not resonance. Resonance is a process, right, where you meet something. There's always difference involved here, right? So something touches you, something speaks to you, you react to it, and then you are transformed. You don't stay the same in this sense. But you cannot produce resonance, right? Neither in politics nor in a dialogue in academia, not even in the opera. Or people in theaters and museums, they always want to create resonance. But sometimes it's failed, right? You can, no matter what you do, you might not achieve it. And if there is resonance in a conference like this is very important for me, and I will be done in a minute, I swear, right? No one can predict what the point will be. Maybe even in a meeting like this, there is new courage for the civil society, as Dawid Bartelt said, some new ideas, some new movement. But you cannot predict whether it will happen. You cannot predict when it will happen. And you cannot predict what this new idea will be. It's Hannah Arendt, the political thinker's conception of natality. And this is very important also for Turkey. We do not have to continue along the same lines we always continued. There is the capacity to start anew. And this capacity to start anew, natality, right, always is kind of coming out of a process of resonance, listening and responding, participating and being involved. And this resonance always comes with friction and struggle, but not with the mortal structure. And then my last slide. Very important, right? I think now the common good can be defined along these lines. What is the common good? Let me try for the Turkish society, right? It would be a state of affairs where citizens meet each other in this mode of resonance. Yes, you are different. Maybe you are Muslim and I'm not, right? Or maybe you are Kurdish and I'm not, but I want to hear you and I'm capable of answering to you. And then we enter into this process of resonance, which allows us to create something new, to start anew. So citizens meet each other in a mode of resonance. That's the common good, but also there needs to be resonance between the political institutions and the citizens. That parliament and the president and whatever you have and the courts are in resonance with the citizens. Maybe that's something that might be lost for many of you right now in the Turkish, but also certainly also in the German state, right? But then I think a society needs to be in resonance with nature. It means we should not simply control nature and use it, but it also means we should not simply follow the law of nature. It's resonance, right? Being in resonance with nature sometimes might include struggling against nature, but somehow being in conversation with it. And I think it's very important, and here Turkey, as I said, might be in a privileged position. It's not enough to be in resonance in Turkey, right? If you don't care about what's going on in the rest of the world, right, you will already be in a kind of closed mode. I mean, probably that's something that's more important in Germany, right? I always tell them, if you say, I don't care about these immigrants, they should care for themselves, then look at your hand, look at your face, look at your voice, right? It's kind of closed-mindedness. It's the opposite of resonance. I don't want to hear them. I don't even care about them. They should care for themselves. Then I cannot be in resonance with my fellow citizens either, right? A civil society, a democracy, a body politic, it can only be a resonant body politics if it's also resonant towards the outside, towards nature, towards the others. And final point, it's historical resonance, right? And this is why I think Turkey is particularly privileged. Being in resonance, I already said at the beginning, listening to the past, right, to the pasts, and giving an answer, an existential answer. What you do here in Istanbul is connected to what happened before, and it will somehow shape a way into a future and towards a world we want to live in. And that's my conception of unlocking the future. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Rosa, for this input. I can imagine that there is quite some movement in people's heads and also hearts now. Let's see how it resonances, and let's see how this resonant theory resonates to the work of Zeynep Savaşçın, who is now going to debate what we just heard, and after that we are going to have a conversation. Let me just briefly introduce you for those who don't know her. Zeynep Savaşçın is Associate Professor of Political Philosophy, Ethics, and the Philosophy of Rights here in Istanbul at Galatasaray University. She earned her PhD in France from École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in Paris. Her work focuses on critical theory, so that is the academic scientific tradition where also Hartmut Rosa comes from, on social philosophy and the crises of citizenship and human rights. She published on Hartmut Rosa's thought, so if you Google Zeynep Savaşçın and Rosa, you will find an article that is an excellent overview of Hartmut Rosa thinking in Turkish. And she translated Marcel Gauchet's work into Turkish. And she is a founding member of an association called the 4 Generations of Rights Social Research Association. Zeynep, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. So I want to begin and thank first to the Heinrich Böll Foundation for this event, and thank also all the team of Heinrich Böll. I'm very happy to be here to talk with a philosopher whose thought I work on. And I will just want to say some I want just highlight some points about Hartmut Rosa's thought. And yes, I think the importance of this theory of, and I thank also Hartmut Rosa to come here to talk with us for this conversation. So I think that the importance of this theory of resonance lies in the fact that it's invite us to rethink the centrality of relationality in a new light, as we search for better life and achieve self-realization. And this theory does not only focus on intersubjectivity, that is on reciprocity between individuals, but on our relationship to the world in general. In this sense, it also allows us to re-examine and reformulate the idea and the practice of citizenship, not just as a simple status granted by the nation state. I think that this has important implication for the contemporary problems that our society imminently face, such as migration, social polarization, climate disaster, the emergence of self-referential identities, and above all, the reduction of democracy to voting. In this sense, I want to very briefly highlight the 3 points that seems essential to me in this theory for rethinking citizenship, and which consequently allows us to shed light on the possibilities of a more confident outlook on the future. So first of all, the theory of resonance, and I think this is the point, this is the crucial point, the possibility of, offers us the possibility of reintegrating a dimension that is often neglected or obscured in theories of democracy. It is the role and impact of emotions. This reminds us that it's not only as rational agents that we participate in the common world, we are also emotional beings, and this has consequences not only for family relationship or friendship, but also for our social and political interaction. It is in this sense, moreover, that the theory of resonance also reveals itself as a theory of public sphere and theory of democracy. What we learn from this theory is that the public sphere is not only rational, what we learn from this theory is that in the public sphere is not only rationality that is at stake, but also our emotions with respect to our ethical consideration and or diverse viewpoints, which means that plurality and diversity are not to be overcome in the public sphere to achieve an ultimate consensus once and for all, but they are constitutive and foundational for the very dynamism of this sphere. Thinking of the core of our relation to the world as reciprocity, which itself is an interaction between a call and response, as Rosa say in his work, is to think of openness to the one that is different, and is to think of listening to the other. In this way, such interaction does not seek to erase the difference or the otherness of any of the two parties. The question that comes to my mind is that in the case of state and society relation in Turkey, as well as within the society itself when polarization is the definitive state of existence, how do we create paths and eventually institutions which allows resonance relationship? And this brings me to my second point. I want to emphasize this time the third and fourth dimension of resonance relations. So the first and second dimensions were the call and response. The idea that resonance relation involves the transformation of both parties and the fact that they are unpredictable and inaccessible is significant for rethinking citizenship. I mean, for being able to think of citizenship in a way other than a status or belonging. This is a point I value a lot, and on the one hand, the reciprocal transformation of the parties entering into a resonance relationship, and the fact that one cannot plan and control the actual creation of resonance reveal the true meaning of intersubjectivity. This intersubjectivity is a reciprocity which, in a certain sense, precedes becoming a subject. Because what is uncontrollable is also this transformation in which subjects open themselves to their own becoming. In our social and political relationship too, this comes down to recognizing that our point of view can shift, that our opinion can change as we open ourselves to the world and others. So if democracy is not the simple definition of a regime, but the very process of democratization, then we cannot think of without specifying its connection to such transformation and to this unpredictability and uncontrollability. This point leads me to ask the following question. Is your theory only relevant for countries with stable democratic institutions, or can also be meaningful for those who are in process of democratization and facing the danger of de-democratization? And finally, I want to return once again to the connection between resonance and reciprocity with regards to the question, this time, of responsibility. It seems that if we want to create the conditions of resonant relationship, and in this way achieve a resonant experience of the world, maybe we must think our own responsibility for the realization of such reciprocity, even before thinking ourselves as being responsible for something or someone. In that sense, I think that the resonance theory allows us also to be careful about ideological misuse and abuse of resonance. By ideological misuse and abuse, I mean seeking resonance in the sameness and uniformity, instead of recognizing, acknowledging, and incorporating diversity and otherness. In this manner, such misuse neglects the true meaning of reciprocity. And this brings to mind when present government in Turkey and many other governments to this date invoke and impose individual responsibilities in the face of crisis and disaster. As citizens, so I ask, how do we respond to such form of responsibility that are imposing, designating, and restricted within individualism and undermine the very reciprocity implied by your resonance theory? So I stop here, and I hope we will have some productive discussion after. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Zeynep. Professor Rosa, would you like to respond? Yes?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think you really you raise very important questions, and I find it very difficult to answer, I must say, right? I mean, for example, I was in Latin America, and particularly in Chile, where a lot of students, I mean, they like the critical theory tradition and they like my work, particularly the acceleration stuff. But they tell me, well, there's no point in engaging in this kind of dialogue with the government, right? Because it's a kind of authoritarian and even a brutal regime, right? So what do you want to resonate with in this sense, right? So they told me, a lot of young activist students, well, we tried discourse and resonance and this kind of stuff, and it completely failed. So now we fight. That was at the time in Chile they had, and now we achieve something, right? And I mean, of course, I understand that argument, right? And that clearly is a problem. So I already. So I'm half willing to agree that sometimes there might be conditions where you have to really fight or struggle to create the conditions which then allow resonance, right? So you might struggle with non-resonant means, because I would really say fighting or even using violence, right, is always non-resonant, right? So there might be times at which you use non-resonant means to achieve a resonant framework. But on the other hand, I think we should not underestimate it is a bit. I mean, look, I mean, for me, it was really kind of eye-opening, the situation in Germany, because, I mean, that's, you know, they would have told me, actually both sides would have told me, we cannot resonate with the other side because they are genocidal murderers, right? That's what they would have said. but it's wrong, right? I mean, they were not genocidal murderers, right? So I really think as human beings, as I think you mentioned this, right, with the emotionality, right? I think there's always the basis, the possibility of entering into a resonant dialogue, right? And it is a part, I would almost say, the kind of ideological move to say, with those I cannot resonate, I have to kill them. I really want to, I think it's unnecessary. So what I'm dreaming of is what I call an affirmative revolution. It doesn't mean that everything should stay as it is, right? But I think what we normally do on the political left, right? I say we now, you're in critical theory and me too, right? Is we identify all the things which are unjust and not right, right? So we would say here, this is not freedom, this is not equality, this is injustice and so on. So let's fight it, right? And I think actually, in the last 100 years, we don't get very far with this. So maybe we can turn it around and not say everything is fine, because not everything is fine. But let's say, oh, here is a moment of resonance or reciprocity, and here is a moment of reciprocity, and maybe in the Böll Stiftung where this is placed, there are moments of resonance. So let's kind of focus on those things which work. I call it affirmative revolution, and say, well, but here is an element of dialogue even between Palestinians and Israelis, right? And let's make that strong instead of criticizing the other. But I know it's a kind of, I don't have the complete solution for this kind of problem. It's just one more sentence. It's true, there is a huge danger of abusing resonance, right? Particularly, I mean, kind of authoritarian or however you call it, regimes say, yes, let's create a resonant society by kind of excluding all the others, right? Everyone who is not of the same opinion. And therefore, I have introduced in my theory a distinction between echo and resonance. And this is very, very important, right? Echo is an ideology, I would say, which wants to affirm and to amplify the sameness, right? We are all, let's say, white German Christian, right, for example, right? And therefore, all who are not white, all who are not Christians, or all who are not heterosexual should be somehow silenced or driven away or so. That's not resonance. It's the exact opposite of resonance. It's closing your mind and excluding everything that's different. So the process of resonance, so what's lost there? The hearing of a different voice with which you connect, and the sense of transformation is lost, right? Echo is the exact opposite of resonance, and you can identify it because it leads to a totally non-responsive, aggressive, repulsive world relationships, like the German Nazis, right? I mean, they wanted to exclude everything which was not, actually in the end, you exclude everything except the voice of the leader, right? It even means, I'll shut up with this anecdote, it's very interesting. Donald Trump in the United States, right? He made in 2016, when he accepted being the candidate for the Republicans as president, he made a powerful speech. I assume he did not write it himself, right? He said, those in Detroit who are never seen, those in the Rust Belt who are never heard, those in the Deep South who are forgotten, I am your voice. And I think this is on the one hand a promise of resonance, right? You were not seen, you were not heard, you were out of resonance, you are alienated. I will give you a voice. But that's not what he said. He did not say, I will give you a voice, I will give you your voice. He said, I am your voice, therefore shut up. It really meant shut up. From now on, I am your voice. And that's not resonance. It's not making your voice heard and connecting and being transformed. There should only be the one voice, and if you have a different opinion from Trump, then you are an enemy of mankind or whatever, right? So that's what I call echo, right? And this is undermining resonance and reciprocity simultaneously. Okay.
I was thinking, is the relationship that the current incumbent president has with its own followers, is it a relationship of resonance? I think it's easy to say that with those who have different ideas, he does not have a relationship of resonance, quite the opposite. But with his own followers, and this is perhaps about half of the Turkish society, is that a relationship of resonance? And if it is, and then you made now the distinction, if the basis of the understanding of life and of society of this person who is acting perhaps in a resonant way, but if the basis is repulsion, because it creates exclusions, it says you don't belong, you don't belong, you don't belong, and because you don't belong, I can be repressive, I can put you into prison, I might even be allowed to kill you. So if that is the case, then even the relationship with those who are in accordance with him might not be resonant. So I wonder how you see it. We are going, I would also like then in the second panel hear the young people, what they think about it. But is there something perhaps, if we identify the flaws of this perhaps false resonant or populist resonance or whatever you want to call it, is there something we can learn from to make it better? Because one side is the leader who says, no, I'm your voice, but the others are the people that are following him, but now have, so to say, dedicated or given his voice to this leader. We should perhaps also start to think not about these leaders only, but then about the people.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I can imagine. I think you touched upon it with your start when you said we are kind of also emotional beings, right? I mean, that's what I always. I really, as I said, I like Habermas a lot, right? But his conception of the kind of the neutral discourse without domination, right, was filtering the best arguments, right? And I think maybe that was somehow wrong because it's not just about kind of just filtering the best arguments. It doesn't matter who says it. Democracy is about being involved as physical beings, right? As people of flesh and blood with desires and hopes and anxieties. And I think right-wing populists, right, are very good at addressing the people, the fears, the emotions, the need of belonging, and this kind of stuff, right? So I always, because I mean we have tendencies towards authoritarianism all over the world, like in Germany now with the right wings, but in France and in Italy with Meloni, and with Trump in the US, and with Johnson in England, and with the Front National and so on. So I think what we can learn, what we can see is that I think even authoritarianism, Modi in India and Bolsonaro in Brazil, right? They are somehow giving an answer to this feeling of alienation, which I pointed out in the first half of my talk. This is why I need it, right? That in a modern liberal society, people don't feel addressed. They don't feel heard. They have lost the sense of self-efficacy. You know, I mean, resonance has it's not just being open to what the others say. It's also having a sense of, I am participating, I'm part of this, I'm connected. And the right-wing populists give, maybe Erdogan, I don't know enough, so I think I'm looking forward to the second panel where I learn more about this, right? But they normally give a sense, you know, the slogan for the Brexits in England was, take back control. That's a promise of, and even like make America great again, a promise of, I give you self-efficacy, you will have part in shaping the future and so on, right? So I think those parties or those leaders are very good at creating this sense, but then they cut, as I said with Trump, and then it's only half, they don't deliver on resonance, because if you have to shut up for this sense of self-efficacy, it's no real self-efficacy. Right? Yeah. You wanna, yeah?
Ben belki burada aynı noktaya ben belki burada David'in sorusuna tekrar geri dönerek şunu söyleyeceğim. Yani it's okay for you.
Yeah, I don't have to.
Konuşayım mı? Tamam. Yani belki biraz aynı şeyi yeniden sormak olacak ama şu eğer hükümetler ve işte halk arasındaki rezonans ilişkileri bizi zorluyorsa, özellikle de otoriter rejimlerde, işte demokrasinin yaşanamadığı ülkelerde, o zaman neden tekrar, o yüzden yurttaşlık biraz vurgu yapmak istedim konuşmamda, yani neden tekrar dönüp bir yurttaşlar arasılık içerisinde rezonansı yakalayabileceğimiz ya da işte rezonanslı ilişkiler için koşullar hazırlayabileceğimiz olanaklar var mı diye bakmayalım. Yani hükümetlerden, politikacılardan bağımsız olarak biz bir yurttaşlar arasılığın alanlarını açamaz mıyız? Bunu sormak istedim.
I think that's what we should, but the problem there is it really needs, I mean, we somehow, that needs to be inclusive too, right? If you simply create an opposite camp, I sometimes wonder, I have to say this, I think, you know, we should be as open as possible, and I come from the political left, civil society, close to Böll Stiftung and so on, right? But sometimes I wonder whether we are really as resonant as we want to be, because I realized when I talk even to my students, right, for them it's very clear, we should not talk to the Chinese, they are enemies of mankind. We should not talk to the Russians, they have invaded Ukraine. We should not talk to the Palestinians or whoever. We should not talk to Trump. We should not talk to Erdogan. He's also so how resonant is this, right? I think it really means so that's the danger. You create a kind of counter public which agrees on let's say LGBTQIA plus rights. Also, all of the people I know would be totally in favor of this. But somehow I think being resonant means let's enter into dialogue with religious traditions, for example, which have a different view. I mean, if I'm already sure that only my view is the correct view, then that's not really resonant. So what I mean, it's very difficult to create this space as a truly resonant space, right? But yes, I agree. I mean, if it's impossible to do it with the government, yes. But on the other hand, I mean, it seems to me when I think of Erdogan, Putin, but also of Trump, of course, but of Modi or Bolsonaro, which I found very interesting, we have to accept that somehow they seem to be in at least in a kind of felt of resonance with half of the population at least, right? I mean, so it doesn't seem to me. But I want to learn more about Turkey here, right? But I think probably there must be some form of so I would hope there is some possibility of resonance at first with half of the population, but then you will find, as you said, this half of the population cannot have a unified view, right, with just one voice. So maybe we can, I think that's the solution. We need to kind of amplify or create conditions of resonance on both sides, right, with the supporters and the opponents, and then create bridges between the two.
Yeah.
I don't know how to do it.
The interesting question would then be, you mentioned it, one of the points, are there institutions or places in public sphere where that type of encounters of possible, hopefully, resonance can happen? Because you need spaces for that.
Yeah,
right?
but you see how difficult it is, because you would assume a university space, right? And actually it's a university space for the social sciences should provide such a place. But this is why I come back to this example again and again. But then you see how fast it goes, that you have on the one hand, you have the two camps, the pro-Palestinians and the pro-Israelians, who at that point really were no longer capable of talking to each other. So how do we overcome it? I don't know. But I think we have to change our conceptions of politics and of human beings along the lines I tried to suggest.
You want to ask something? No, let me ask one question. I would then even want to open up, and I'm sure, there are already hands raised. But one last question, a very Heinrich Böll Foundation question. Is there, regarding the chances of creating resonance, do we have to make distinctions, or do we have to take into consideration class and gender? Yeah. And put it the other way around, is it more difficult for poor people to create resonance, and is it perhaps more difficult for women, or more easier to create resonance and be active in creating resonant relationships than for men and for better off people?
Yes, thanks for this question. At least here I feel I have a good answer. At least I'm convinced of an answer. I think it's totally wrong. I mean, sometimes people tell me, well, resonance is something for the cultural elites, right? They can go to the opera and feel resonance, but the working people out there don't. I think this is classism, and it's wrong, right? It's really wrong. Resonance is a basic human capacity. And for example, you mentioned the gender question, right? I would really say that in the way not just the Western world, patriarchy devises the gender division, right? It's actually the women who have the capacity for resonance, right? I mean, think of care work, for example, education. This needs resonance, listening and responding, right? Or there's always almost universally the idea that women are capable of listening they have access to their own emotions, while men are kind of cold, rational killers, so to speak, right? For example, we have the saying, maybe you have that in Turkey too, boys don't cry, right? I mean, tears really are a kind of sign of resonance. Something is touching me. So I would clearly say, I mean, it would be stupid to say, well, I mean, certainly it's wrong to say men are capable of resonance and women are not, right? And I think it's the same with classism, right? It's arrogance, it's class arrogance to say, oh, but working class people don't have the chances for resonance. Of course they are in resonance, and they create resonance in their families or in their, sometimes even in their work, right? So this is where my hope hinges on, right? I believe this basic capacity for resonance is always there, and I want to, because I'm troubled, you know, I always feel I don't have the good answers. So I want to make one more attempt. When you have a situation where you have a kind of president or a ruling party which seems kind of non-resonant, you know, in last couple of weeks I've discussed frequently the role of religion in this. Because some people say, well, religion is simply hostile to resonance because they claim they have the truth, right? I mean, this is the absolute truth. God says, and therefore you have to do this. That's non-resonant. I don't want to hear your opinion because I know what God wants. But I think that's not all that is to be said about religion. Because on the one hand, all huge religions of the world have this sense of listening to some other, right? And being touched by some higher or other reality and being transformed. And religious, they always depend on arguments, right? There's always arguments about what God really wants. And I think even in an authoritarian regime, right, it depends on political arguments. So immediately you have a chance of listening and responding even within the ruling party, as you already said. And then we somehow have to broaden this horizon to include the opposition. Well, I think I failed again. I'm sorry.
No. Thank you. Well, you will have chance to.
The first question is this. I'd like to push you on this idea of thinking political institutions as agents capable of resonance, because I think political institutions, we have good names for this. We have representation, we have accountability to the people, but I worry that thinking about political institutions as agents capable of embodying resonance precisely takes that in the direction where people like Trump or, you know, all those populist leaders that you have talked about may also claim that they speak for those institutions themselves, right? So that's my first question. The second question is, I would like to push you a little bit about the actual possibility, sort of, well, I'm not an empirical political theorist, but I'd like to, I think, hear a little bit I'd like to know whether empirically do we have good evidence that people actually get transformed after these resonant experiences. And the reason why I'm asking this is one thing. I've read about the abortion debates in the US, and I was reading about this grassroots movements where they brought pro-life and pro-choice activists together in the same room, and this was like over a very long time, and the whole point was actual dialogue, and they did, and the parties really respected one another, but they were more entrenched in their opinions than to begin with, right? So their conceptions of the good life have not changed, which leaves us still with the, I guess, the irreducible variety of good life, notions of good life in society.
Thank you for your question. Over there, yes.
Sizi dinlerken aslında bu rezonans meselesinden bahsettiğinizde bir bebek ve anne arasındaki ilişkiye örnek verdiniz. Ve bir şekilde bu da benim aslında aile meselesi üzerine düşünmeme sebep oldu. Yani o anne ve bebek ya da bakım veren ve bebek arasındaki rezonans bir nedenle kayboluyor ya da sürdürülemiyor. Yani bazı aile biçimlerinde. Dolayısıyla bu rezonansı gerçekleştirecek özneler olmanın yolunu da kaybetmiş olabiliyoruz. Yani çok çok geriye gittiğimizde bunu aile üzerine yeniden düşünmek gerekiyormuş gibi geldi. Çünkü bireyin evet bu potansiyeli var, bu kapasitesi var ama bunu hiç deneyimlememişse toplum içinde diğerleriyle nasıl ilişki kuracağız? Ya bence Türkiye'de şu an en büyük sorunlardan bir tanesi zaten bu ilişki kurma biçimlerini hiç deneyimlememiş olmamızdan kaynaklanıyor. Ve tabii ki yani bunun üzerine konuşmak da yalnızca belirli bir entelektüel düzeye sahip bireylerin özneleşebilme potansiyeline sahip olan bireylerin yapabileceği bir şeymiş gibi görünüyor. Bu konu hakkında ne düşünüyorsunuz?
Thank you.
İsmim Gözde Aytemur. Galatasaray Üniversitesi Sosyoloji bölümünden orada çalışıyorum. Dediğim gibi yani ben dinlerken sizi biraz daha yöntemsel bir soru, metodolojik bir soru aslında aklıma geldi ve hep bunu düşündüm bütün konuşma boyunca. Yani Türkiye gibi toplumsal kutuplaşmanın çok yoğun olduğu bağlamlarda araştırmacı olmak da belli zorluklar içeriyor. Çünkü bir araştırmacının da hem nesnel kalma sorumluluğu oluyor ama hem de bir yandan da yani toplum içerisindeki gelişmelerden duygulanıyor. Yani hani kimi zaman çok da iyi duygular hissetmediği, hatta tam olarak kötü duygular hissettiği gruplarla çalışmak durumunda kalabiliyor. Örneğin işte bir kadın, bir entelektüel olarak ya birçok hani toplumsal rolle birlikte siz karşınızdakine, yani çok da iyi duygular hissetmediğiniz insanları anlamak için bir ömür, bir kariyer ortaya koyarken diğer yandan o insanlar işte kadın cinayetleri dedik, işte sizin varlığınıza karşı ciddi bir öfke, hınç, hem entelektüel hem kadın varlığınıza karşı öfke, hınç duyuyorlar ve hem politik bir hedef haline geliyorsunuz, işte hem fiziksel bir hedef haline geliyorsunuz. Bir yerden sonra da insan şey hissedebiliyor, ya ben artık bu insanları duymak istemiyorum. Peki yani bütün bu bağlamda, yani araştırmacının duygulanımı bağlamında rezonans kavramını nasıl düşünebiliriz? Teşekkür ediyorum şimdiden.
Burada daha siyaset bağlamında ele alındı konu ama ben rezonans tecrübesinin kendisi hakkında birazcık daha felsefi bir soru sormak istiyorum. Biz rezonans eksenlerinden bahsettiniz, yani bahsediyorsunuz normal şartlarda ve sosyal teorinin aslında bu eksenleri ortaya koyup iyi çalışıp çalışmadığını ortaya koyması gerektiğini düşünüyorsunuz anladığım kadarıyla. Fakat bunun nesnelliği konusu yani muğlak kalıyor diye düşünüyorum. Yani ben şu açıdan, birkaç açıdan muğlak kalıyor. Bir tanesi şu, örneğin ben doğa ile ilişkimde rezonanslı olduğumu iddia ediyorsam, rezonanslı bir ilişki kurduğumu düşünüyorsam, siyasette de bunu yapabildiğim anlamına gelir mi gelmez mi gibi. Veya bir rezonanslı ilişkide olduğumu düşünüyorum ama öteki de rezonanslı bir ilişkide olduğunu düşünüyor. Karşı karşıya geldiğimizde ortak bir noktada olmadığımızı veya bir araya gelemediğimizi görebiliriz. Yani bu durumda bu rezonanslı ilişkiyi daha iyi somut çıktılarını nasıl görebiliriz? Yani evet, kontrol edilemezlik var, dönüştürücülük var ama her ikisi de bunun olduğunu iddia ediyorsa ve ortak bir nokta bulamıyorsa nasıl bundan bahsedebiliriz? Bir diğer şey de ben okurken açıkçası biraz aşkınlığın deneyimi, özellikle Levinas'ın düşünceleriyle ortak şeyler yakaladım. Sizin belki böyle bir niyetiniz vardı yoktu bilmiyorum ama yani orada işte doğa ile ilişkide de veya diğer rezonans eksenlerinde de bir üçüncü şahısın, Levinas'ın olması, aşkının deneyimi, onun o kontrol edilemezliği sağlaması gibi bazı öğeleri fark ettim. Özellikle dinleme, yani görmek değil de dinlemeye olan vurgunuz ve canlılığa olan vurgunuz, sanki bunu böyle dünyada olmak fiziki bir şey değil de daha canlılık felsefesiyle alakalı ve biyoloji felsefesine daha yakınsıyor gibi de bir imaj sergiliyor bana göre. Bu konuda ne düşünüyorsunuz? Teşekkür ederim.
Yeah, thank you very much for these questions. I'd like to stand up in order to see you, right? Maybe I begin in the reverse order, right? This question of objectivity, right, is a very difficult one. But for me, it's very important to say it, to see that it's not, resonance is not just a subjective experience, it's an objective form of relationship, right? you see it most clearly in the dialogue. Let's say the two of us are talking, right? And afterwards I might say, oh, it was such a resonant conversation, right? And you say, maybe, right, oh, Rosa didn't listen at all, right? He simply made his points and he completely ignored my arguments, right? Then I think you could see from an objective perspective, right, even when you film it with a camera, was there listening and answering? Was there a transformation of argumentation? Was there a kind of mutual, was there resonance between the two, or was there none, right? So I really think you could measure it. But possibly you can even do it with brain scans also, right? So I really insist it's an objective relationship, not a subjective experience. Resonance is not an emotional state of the subject, right? It's something that is between the two sides, and whether there's transformation. I mean, that was the part of the first question. I'll come back to the. No, I'll go to the transformation later. Levinas, yes, is very close to. I'm very inspired by Levinas, right? And I'm very close at. I try to be close to what he says. You mentioned this question. I could be resonant in nature, but not in politics. I do distinguish between the experiences of resonance. They are only temporal, right? But a resonant disposition, right? And the resonant disposition meaning, sometimes I try to draw on Robert Bellah there, wide-angle attentiveness, right? Being open to be called, right? I mean, it's a mode of being in the world, right? I can either go with a closed mind, I simply follow my goals. That's a kind of non-resonant form. It's close to the mode of aggression. Or I'm kind of in a mode of resonance, then I listen to the voices, a bit in the Levinas sense, right? And then I would really say, that is openness to nature. I do see the cat who is suffering, maybe, right? Or I do see the trees who are dying. And I do hear the people who are oppressed, right? Even those who are far away. So I think to be dispositional, it's a kind of, then it becomes a kind of almost personality trait, right? To really be in a kind of wide-angle attentiveness, and that belongs to nature, politics, self-relationship to our own bodies, and so on. There is a question on the being a researcher. I completely understand. I mean, it's very difficult for me to answer. You know, I'm male and I live in Germany, so I really I think it's really important. I mean, it might be arrogant, right? Because I think I can imagine the situation you're talking about. I mean, methodologically, I do distinguish, or I claim that we need a third-person perspective, which is simply kind of describing it from a neutral outside. So you can, of course, record someone's views, right? But I think we also need a kind of first-person perspective to understand society, what is driving its logics, what are the fears and the hopes, and so on, what are the experiences, right? And there I can understand that as a researcher you really get into trouble because you don't want to understand the hopes and the fears of someone who wants to kill you, right? I mean, that leads to a kind of hermeneutical impossibility, right? I understand that, so I don't know what to do. But I would say, well, I think as far as possible, it must be, you know, my hope is really, it goes a bit back to Levinas or Buber too, right? Saying, looking into someone's eyes and hearing someone's voice carries the possibility of breaking this kind of total repulsiveness, which in that case is not yours, but the other, right? So I'm a hopeless optimist on that point, that it must always be possible to somehow crack the shell, because the person who wants to kill you as a woman or as a sociologist, right, is himself, I would say, you know, that goes to the first question, I think, as human beings, that's the thing with the babies, right? As a subject, you can only become a subject through the resonance, right? There's someone speaking to you. That's how you get, there I'm drawing on George Herbert Mead, right? How do we become a subject? We only get self-awareness through the eyes of the other, right? So I really hope that there's always this possibility of breaking open the shell. But I understand that this is very, very difficult, right? And that brings me to the third question of the mother, child, and the family. My claim really is that resonance is the basic human capacity. By the way, I made it in the resonance book. I said, we know it from child development psychology, that babies necessarily need to have these experiences of resonance to become subjects. And then some gerontologists, doctors, or people from care services told me, yes, Mr. Rosa, and do you know that even when we are very old and we lose the capacity for speech and we lose reason, right, from dementia, we are still resonant beings, right? So I think it's very important that we kind of are always resonant, but we might lose it. And families can be both, right? They can be the places where we lose resonance, right? Because parents don't listen and answer, right? They tell fathers in particular, right? I mean, that's in Germany, it's the same, right? The father is not the one who is resonating with you. He's telling you what to do, basically. And families can become extreme spaces of alienation where your own voice is exactly not heard, right, and developed, right? So I think what we need is spaces. Of course, we need forms and spaces where we can practice forms of resonance, and families could be it, but they are not necessarily it. Do I have the first question? The first two questions. Do I have evidence? I have 2 points to make on this. Yes, I have some evidence. You might know the studies by Robert Fishkin. I think it's Robert, the first name, and his people, who actually his finding were contrary to what you said, namely that in citizen assemblies, people do transform their views. I think that in your case, they didn't, right? It's probably, this is what I always say, if you have a polarized situation like the pro-choice and the pro-life situation, right? And then you make them sit down and talk to each other. That very rarely leads to resonance, right? Actually, it just leads to kind of confrontation and maybe even a kind of a strengthening of the opposition. They need to cook together, right? Or to play soccer together, or to do something which breaks the ice and which then might have a transformative effect. I mean, I think an additional problem is if you make the encounter confrontational, and if you do it on the internet, then the result normally is that you increase polarization, right? But if you create kind of citizen assemblies where they really have to come up with decisions, then the empirical evidence I know is that there really is transformation towards a kind of understanding, at least for the other situations. But nevertheless, the problem, of course, my last point about institutions, I know this is a notoriously difficult point for many reasons. I'm also inspired not just by Levinas, also by Martin Buber, right? The IU relationship. But the question is, how do we institutionalize it? I can also make the point with Adorno that about the uncontrollability, das Nicht-Identische, the non-identical, but how do you institutionalize it, right? But nevertheless, I think a functioning democracy needs a kind of sense that, for example, the parliament is a place which resonates with you. I feel my voice, my opinions expressed there and answered there, right? Or for some, it might be the Supreme Court, or it might be at least the ensemble of institutions that somehow speak to us. You know, I'm finished in a second, I swear. I was once talking to lawyers because I said law is totally non-resonant because the prosecutor wants to prove that he is the murderer, and the lawyer wants to prove that he is not the murderer, and they use all forms of rhetorics and tricks, and there's no resonance. And then lawyers actually totally disagreed, and they said, it's not true. There are sometimes, or very often, criminals say, it's the first time that I was really listened to, that I was answered, that I felt some form of resonance. So I think institutions can become spaces for resonance. I mean, it needs to be possible, otherwise we are lost.
When it comes to institution, you said, and also you wrote that actually resonance requires strong public independent media, which is also a point in Turkey.
Çok teşekkürler. Özlem Tekeben, Yeşil Düşünce Derneği'nden. Soracağım soru aslında Türkiye'nin ilk 100 yıllık tarihinde laiklik kavramının hiyerarşik olarak siyasi bir alan olmasıyla birlikte günümüzde daha çok tabandan gelen bir sekülerlikten bahsediyoruz. Rezonans kavramıyla bunu birlikte düşündüğümüzde ben yeşil bir siyasetçi olarak da yeşil politikaların önüne açacak bir durumu bu değişimin sağlayabilip bilmeyeceğini size sormak istiyorum. Çünkü Türkiye'de son 20-25 yıllık aslında politik deneyimimizin de oldukça karşıtlıklar ve kutuplaşma üzerinden şekillendiği bir ortamda artık toplumun karşı karşıya gelme, yüzleşme ve birbiriyle iletişimde olma gibi bir durumu da bence çok net bir şekilde ortaya koyduğunu düşünüyorum. Sizin teoriniz üzerinden yeşil bir siyaset bunu nasıl kullanabilir? Teşekkürler.
İpek Rajan, I'm a lecturer in Istanbul. So I'll just pit sort of another German scholar's views against you from the 1930s. This is Karl Löwenstein. I'm not sure about my pronunciation, but militant democracy, just to cut it short, he says just ban things, right? So let's turn to your campus at 2. Palestinians, Israelis, well, he would say just ban them. So the only way to fight these, according to him, is to go militant and adopt very tough legislation against groups that disrupt democracy. It is, I guess, the opposite of your theory of resonance, but it pays, right? So peaceful campus at 2. So what do you think about this? Militant democracy versus your ideas. So thank you.
Okay, so Khan from ÖHVSS. I have a question. I mean, when you talk about the past and history, and we cannot deny the existence of emotions. And then, for example, if I able to resonate with someone in front of my eyes, the other should put aside his or her emotions, just like a resentment of Jeanne-Marie. For example, if I killed the father of someone, who is in front of me, I cannot resonate. If I should, in the process of resonate, in that case, the other should put aside his or her feeling, as far as I understand, to be able to resonate. And then my question comes here. So can we say that the resonation also, the resonance, it's a hierarchical relationship to the very, from the very beginning, or maybe I misunderstood the relationship with the other. Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum bu güzel tartışmalar için. Yeni ufuklar açtı. Özellikle geleceğin kilidini açmak başlığı hakikaten çok heyecan verici, çok düşündürücü ve mücadeleye davet edici. Benim sorum bütün bu akademik tartışmalardan ve akademik sorulardan sonra medya ile ilgili olacak. Bu tabloda gazetecinin rolü ne? Medya nasıl yer alıyor? Ve onunla da bağlantılı olaraktan aslında hak örgütleri neler yapmalılar? Bunun üzerine birkaç ipucu alabilirsek çok iyi olacak. Çünkü bu çizilen tablo aslında pek çok keşkeler içeriyor. Bu keşkelere benim cevabım şöyle, yani gerçekçi ol, imkansız ise deyip yolumuza devam edeceğiz. Çok çok teşekkür ediyorum.
Thanks for the brainstorming, but whenever there is a German institution coming from Germany doing workshops like this in Turkey, I can't stop thinking about that is ultimately useless. Because I don't know if you're aware of the political atmosphere in Turkey, but right now a parliament member, Can Atalay, has been in the prison for 2 years, despite the fact that he should be out and working at the parliament. Opposition leader Selahattin Demirtas has been in the prison for 8 years. And your government, I'm sorry, but has been doing collaboration with Tayyip Erdogan for almost 20 years, German government, not yours, of course, your leftist side, for 20 years in order to keep the refugees in Turkey, ultimately, and turning Turkey into an open prison for the Syrians, Afghans, and so that Germans can live in much better conditions peacefully. So I think the headline should not be this. I think it should be pathways for a renewed thinking about European Union and Germany. Maybe you should do these efforts in Germany in order to, seek a better Turkey, because we don't have democracy. You're talking about civil society. You're talking about media. The only free media is in YouTube in Turkey. All the other newspapers are owned by Demirören, Tüpçü, we call him here, and he's a strong, ally for Tayyip Erdogan. So we have no democracy. Today or the day before yesterday, I read something. Somebody cursed on Putin because he, banned TikTok or something like that, and they arrested him in Turkey because also TikTok or something like that was banned in Turkey. So they made an allegation between Putin and whom. So we have no democracy, and as long as you collaborate this with Islamist nationalist government, we will have no democracy. All these workshops will be in vain. I'm sorry, but Someone has to say that. So you have to take the burden of the refugees, ultimately share the burden with Turkey, and support the dissident people, opposition people in Turkey, so that we have a democracy. Right now, Ekrem İmamoğlu is talking about being banned from politics. So all the opposition party leaders will be in prison. I don't know if you understand the seriousness of the situation. Merhaba Raquel Hanım.
I think I try to understand. I think I understand your point, right? Probably I cannot understand it completely. But I think from what you said, you gave us two reasons why this might be important. Oh, I don't need this thing here. Why this might be important. Number one is you said you hardly have any spaces left for dialogue and for democracy. Right? Yes, but what is this here? I think this is why it might be very important to have some places like this to also provide a space for you, right? And to talk about this and to hear this kind of voices. It's important for Germans too to hear that voice inside. But it's not just important for Germans. It might actually be a place where Turkish people who are minorities and who are maybe persecuted in the way you describe can meet. And I totally agree. We agreed that the German policy is awful in many ways, right? I totally agree. But your example shows that we are in this together. It's a problem for the refugees here. It's a problem for Turkish society. It's a fucking problem for German society, right? So let's go together. Let's create spaces of where we can set things in motion and do something. I mean, I agree. We should do more, and we should do. This is. I told Dawid sometimes I'm either close to suicide or to going into the mountains because it seems so hopeless, right? Unfortunately, we cannot change German society easily either. But I agree with you. It is important. And we need to, and this is what I mean, we need to use the spaces we have to set things in motion. It doesn't help. I mean, what you're doing right now, even so I think I understand it, it's also out of frustration, but if you say, go home and stay there, right, I think it doesn't help. Even so, I do agree. And that's what I said in the beginning. I even wrote to you. I am a little hesitant. I don't want to come to Turkey, right, to tell the people what they should do. And I understand that this resonance theory sounds very idealistic. As you said, it sounds Swiss-like, right? But the reality is it's getting pretty grim in Germany too, with many in many respects, right? So I think so my answer would be, but we are in the problem together. It's our world, and you proved that the Turkish society and reality is connected to the European and the German reality, right? So those who want to change this reality need to collaborate on this, I think. What is the role of the media? I think it is, I mean, somewhere I read, and I really like this, he said, the most important point is, even also in political debate and dialogue, right, that I phrase what you mean if you're my opponent, right, in a way that you say, yes, that's what I mean. Because it has come to a political situation where we actually always distort what the others mean, right? I mean, let's say, take the German society. When the right-wing people rephrase the green position, they say, oh, you want a dictatorship, an eco-dictatorship, which is totally flooding us with immigrants. That's not what the Greens would describe for the future, but it's the same on the other side, right? So I think journalists could actually give voices, right, to people in a way that they say, yes, that's what I mean. And then these voices can be put in dialogue, right? If you only, in a journal, if you distort the voice of the other, then you simply increase polarization. But what you need is media which themselves, I believe it might be, maybe it's different in Turkey, but I think we need media which are not themselves part of the battle, but which provide grounds where the different voices can enter into this kind of dialogue, right? I think that's the most important thing if you want to unlock the future. On the question of history and emotions, and I think what you said, you asked this, your idea. I'm not sure whether I understood the problem completely, but I think I mean, I don't think we should put aside the feelings, right? When I talk to, let's say, do you talk to me and my father killed your brother or whatever it is, right? On the one hand, then it's a conflict within you. On the one hand, you might hate me, right? If my father killed yours or so, right? So there is hatred, and I don't think we need to deny it, right? You think you are wrong, you are evil also, right? But I think resonance means, but nevertheless, there is a tendency in you or in me that I want to hear you, right? I want to get in this kind of dialogue. And I really think resonance starts with a kind of equilibrium. If I let rage dominate me, you are an asshole and you should go away, right? Then, of course, then dialogue is kind of pointless, right? But if I try to be completely neutral, it would be untrue to myself, right? That's not resonance either, and it's maybe not even possible, right? So I think we somehow need to bridge this or uphold this equilibrium. I cannot deny my feelings, right? I cannot do away with them, but nevertheless, I want to open up and enter into a kind of dialogue. Militant democracy, I don't know. I mean, that's what they talk about now in Germany too, right? Going against, even banning a party which in my part of Germany, in my region Thuringia, got 32%. I find it totally awful. But banning, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm somehow against this. I don't think, you know, I think that might even be, that's what I said earlier, even part of my own tradition, right? And that puts me in problem with your question, right? You know, I said in the beginning, I see a problem from a German perspective, that we don't want to talk to Erdogan's regime, we don't want to talk to Putin's regime, we don't want to talk to Xi Jinping, we don't want to talk to the Iranians, we don't want to talk to the Trumpians, we don't want to talk to the Modi regime, but then we only talk with ourselves, right, with our leftist. I think somehow we need to manage it. A democracy can only win. I really believe, and I agree, it's idealistic. I don't know. I mean, but I think I believe we have the better arguments. We can create the better future, right? And we can do this by convincing arguments, not by banning and policing and doing the same as the right-wing authoritarians do. And the last point, the green politics and secularization, right? Well, I think the problem with, I don't think religion, as I said in the beginning, is necessarily hostile to democracy, but religions have to give up the idea that only they have the right religion, right? You can say, I am Christian, or I'm Muslim, or I'm a Hindu, and I believe in it, but I am open to your having a different view. And I actually think the green voice now is very similar and is in the same danger, right? That there is a kind of eco-religion almost, right, who thinks, well, there's only one correct voice, right? And that's, of course, a problem for any state. So I think, of course, we need secular discourse, which gives the ecological perspective a strong point. And if the ecological disaster gets worse and worse, then in the end, that actually might create a form of social awareness, even global social awareness. It's the one world we live in, and this one world we live in is about to get destroyed. So we need to collectively overcome it. By the way, I have one point of hope for the future. If there would be aliens, that would really be our salvation, right? So let's hope for the aliens. That's the best I can say. Thanks a lot.